For nearly 2 decades, millions of Americans welcomed one family into their living rooms, watched their struggles, their milestones, their heartbreaks, and their triumphs. But today, something changed. Not quietly, not subtly, and definitely not without raising serious questions. Because in a moment that stunned longtime viewers of Little People, Big World, Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff stepped forward and revealed, live, the real reason they walked away from the show that made them household names. And what they said wasn't just about television. It was about family. It was about business. And it may reveal deeper fractures inside one of reality TV's most recognizable families than fans ever realized. For years, viewers thought they understood the dynamics behind the scenes at Roloff Farms. They believed they knew the tensions, the disagreements, even the heartbreak. But now, according to statements made publicly and conversations confirmed across multiple interviews and appearances, a different picture is emerging. A picture that raises one unavoidable question. Did this family leave television, or were they pushed out by something far more complicated? Stay with us, because what we're about to break down is not just a reality TV exit story. It's a story about control, legacy, and what happens when real life collides with reality television in ways cameras can't fully capture. To understand why Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff made this decision, you have to go back. Not months, but years. Because this wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. And it definitely wasn't simple. When Little People, Big World first premiered on TLC in 2006, it introduced audiences to the Roloff family, led by Matt Roloff and Amy Roloff, as they navigated life on their Oregon farm while raising children in a family where dwarfism was part of daily life. What made the show compelling wasn't just its premise. It was its authenticity. Viewers weren't just watching a family. They were watching real relationships evolve. Real marriages strain. Real children grow up on camera. And among those children was Zach Roloff, who would eventually become one of the central figures of the show, especially as he built his own life with Tori Roloff, whose presence brought a new dynamic that fans quickly connected with. Their relationship felt grounded, relatable, stable in a way that reality TV often isn't. But behind that stability, tensions were building. Because as the years went on, the show began shifting from a story about parenting and family life into something else entirely. A story about ownership. A story about inheritance. And most importantly, a story about the future of Roloff Farms. And that's where everything started to change. Roloff Farms wasn't just a backdrop for the show. It was the heart of it. The pumpkin season, the tours, the traditions, all of it became symbolic, not just for the family, but for fans across America who saw the farm as a legacy in motion. But behind the scenes, according to interviews and statements given over time, disagreements began to surface about what would happen to that legacy. Would the farm stay in the family? Who would take it over? And under what terms? These weren't just casual discussions. They were business negotiations. And according to both public interviews and comments made by Zach and Tori in various platforms, those negotiations didn't go smoothly. Reports suggest that Zach had hoped to purchase part of the farm and continue the legacy himself. But those plans ultimately fell apart. And when they did, something deeper shifted. Because what had once been a shared vision for the future became a source of division, family fractures in the public eye. For longtime viewers, the tension wasn't entirely hidden. Episodes of the show began reflecting a more strained dynamic, particularly between Zach and his father, Matt Roloff. Conversations felt heavier. Interactions felt more cautious. And fans started noticing something was off. At the same time, Amy Roloff had already stepped away from daily ownership of the farm following her divorce from Matt, which added another layer of complexity to the situation. Because now, decisions about the farm and its future were no longer shared equally. And according to public discussions, that imbalance may have contributed to growing frustrations within the family. What viewers were seeing on screen was only part of the story, because off-screen, real-life decisions were being made, decisions that would ultimately lead to one of the most significant exits in the show's history. When Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff spoke openly about their departure, they didn't frame it as a dramatic fallout or a sudden break. Instead, they described it as a decision rooted in priorities: family, privacy, and control over their own narrative. According to their own words in interviews and live discussions, they expressed a growing discomfort with continuing to share deeply personal moments on camera, especially as their children got older. That concern alone isn't unusual. Many reality TV families eventually reach a point where the exposure begins to outweigh the benefits. But what made this situation different was timing. Because their departure came after years of visible tension surrounding the farm negotiations. And while they did not frame their exit solely around that issue, the timeline has led many observers to connect the dots. Reports suggest that the failed farm deal played a significant role in reshaping Zach's relationship with his father, and by extension, his role on the show. And once that relationship shifted, continuing the show may have felt fundamentally different. Less natural, less authentic, and potentially more difficult to sustain. One of the most telling developments came when Zach and Tori made a major life change. They relocated their family away from Oregon to Washington. This wasn't just a move. It was a statement. Because physically distancing themselves from Roloff Farms also meant distancing themselves from the central setting of the show. And in reality television, location matters. Proximity matters. Access matters. By stepping away geographically, they were also stepping away structurally from the show's core. And while they didn't explicitly tie the move to their departure at the time, many fans saw it as an early sign that something bigger was unfolding. From an industry perspective, exits like this are rarely about one single factor. They're about convergence. Legal considerations, financial negotiations, family dynamics, and long-term brand strategy all intersect in ways viewers don't always see. Reality television, despite its name, is still a business. Contracts are negotiated, storylines are shaped, and participation comes with both financial incentives and personal costs. For a couple like Zach and Tori, who have spent years in the public eye, the decision to step away likely involved weighing those costs against the benefits. Financially, leaving a long-running show means giving up a steady income stream. But it can also open doors to other opportunities: brand partnerships, independent content creation, and greater control over public image. From a family standpoint, stepping away can reduce pressure, especially when tensions already exist behind the scenes. And from a long-term perspective, it allows them to redefine their identity outside of the show, not as characters in a storyline, but as individuals shaping their own path. The moment their departure became widely discussed, social media lit up. Fans who had followed the Roloff family for years began sharing reactions that ranged from support to disappointment to outright speculation. Some viewers expressed understanding, saying that after so many years on television, stepping away felt like a natural evolution. Others questioned whether the show could continue in the same way without one of its central couples. And then there were those who focused on the underlying tensions, particularly the unresolved issues surrounding the farm. Online discussions began dissecting past episodes, analyzing conversations, and trying to piece together what really happened behind closed doors. Because for many fans, this wasn't just entertainment. It was a family they felt connected to. And when that family changes, it feels personal. The departure of Zach and Tori raises important questions, not just for the family, but for the future of Little People, Big World itself. Can the show continue without them? Will the focus shift entirely to other family members? Or is this the beginning of the end for a series that has already spanned nearly 2 decades? There's no official confirmation yet about the show's long-term future. But historically, reality series built around family dynamics often struggle when key members step away. Because what keeps viewers invested isn't just the setting, it's the relationships. And when those relationships change, everything changes. At its core, this isn't just a story about television. It's a story about a family navigating real-life challenges under public scrutiny. It's about a couple deciding what matters most: And it's about the difficult reality that sometimes stepping away is the only way forward. For fans who watch Zach grow up on screen, this moment feels like the end of an era. But for Zach and Tori, it may be the beginning of something else entirely. A life that's less public, less pressured, and more their own. And now we want to hear from you. Do you think Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff made the right decision? Was this about family, business, or something deeper? And what do you think this means for the future of Little People, Big World? Join the conversation below. Because this story is still unfolding. What if the real reason Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff walked away wasn't fully said out loud? What if the truth isn't in one interview, one moment, or one decision, but buried across years of conversations, negotiations, and moments that, at the time, seemed small, but now look very different? Because when you step back and examine the full timeline surrounding Little People, Big World, a pattern begins to emerge. And that pattern points directly to one issue that may have quietly reshaped everything: the future of Roloff Farms. To fully understand the weight of what happened, you have to understand what Roloff Farms represents, not just financially, but emotionally. For years, the farm wasn't just land. It was legacy. Built, expanded, and transformed by Matt Roloff, the property became the physical symbol of the family's story, a place where memories were created, traditions were built, and where the show itself found its identity. But as the children grew older, one question became unavoidable: who would take over? And more importantly, how? According to multiple public interviews and statements given by family members over time, there were serious discussions about one of the children purchasing part of the farm. Among them, Zach Roloff appeared to be the most closely connected to that possibility, both because of his involvement and because of how central his story had become to the show. Reports suggest that negotiations did take place, but they did not end in agreement. And that's where things became complicated. Neither side has publicly released full details of the negotiations, and no official documents outlining the discussions have been made public. But based on statements made separately by Matt Roloff and Zach Roloff, it's clear that expectations did not align. Matt Roloff has indicated in interviews that selling the farm, or part of it, was a complex decision involving financial realities and long-term sustainability. Zach, on the other hand, has expressed disappointment with how those discussions unfolded, suggesting that the outcome was not what he had hoped for. What's critical here is not just that the deal failed. It's how that failure may have affected the relationship. Because when family and business intersect, disagreements don't stay professional. They become personal. And for a family already under the pressure of reality television, that tension doesn't just exist behind closed doors. It becomes part of the story. Longtime viewers of Little People, Big World began noticing subtle but significant shifts in tone during later seasons. Conversations between Zach and Matt felt more guarded. Discussions about the farm carried an undercurrent of tension. Moments that once felt lighthearted began to feel heavy, not scripted, not exaggerated, but real in a way that made some viewers uncomfortable. Because what they were witnessing wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was a family navigating a difficult transition, one that didn't have an easy resolution. And as those moments accumulated, the narrative of the show itself began to change. One of the most telling aspects of this situation isn't what was said. It's what wasn't. There was no dramatic on-screen confrontation that definitively explained everything. No single episode where all the cards were laid on the table. Instead, there was distance, less interaction, fewer shared moments, and eventually a physical separation when Zach and Tori moved their family to Washington. That move, while framed as a lifestyle choice, also had deeper implications. Because stepping away from Oregon meant stepping away from the daily environment of the farm, and by extension, from the central location of the show. It created space. And sometimes, space is the clearest signal that something has changed. When Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff eventually confirmed their departure, they emphasized themes that resonated with many families in the public eye: privacy, control, and protecting their children. They spoke about wanting to step back from filming and focus on their lives outside of television. And importantly, they did not frame their exit as a dramatic fallout. But context matters. Because when you place those statements alongside the timeline of the farm dispute, the move to Washington, and the visible changes in family dynamics, it paints a more layered picture. Not of a single reason, but of multiple factors converging at the same time. From a media industry perspective, situations like this are more common than viewers might think, though rarely this visible. Reality television relies on authenticity, but it also depends on access. When key participants become less available, physically or emotionally, the structure of the show begins to shift. And when those participants are central figures, the impact is even greater. In this case, Zach and Tori weren't just supporting cast members. They were part of the next generation of the show. Their storyline represented continuity. Their children represented the future. So their departure isn't just a casting change. It's a structural shift. And for a long-running series like Little People, Big World, structural shifts can be defining. While exact figures are not publicly disclosed, reality television salaries, especially for long-running cast members, can represent a significant income stream. Walking away from that kind of stability is not a small decision, which suggests that the reasons behind the exit were not purely financial. In fact, it may indicate the opposite, that non-financial factors had become more important. Family relationships, personal boundaries, long-term lifestyle choices. These are not decisions made lightly. And when they outweigh financial incentives, it often signals a deeper shift in priorities. Once news of their departure gained traction, entertainment outlets across the United States began covering the story. Headlines focused on the real reason behind their exit. Articles revisited past interviews, pulling together pieces of a narrative that had been developing over time. But what's important to note is that most credible reporting has remained careful, avoiding definitive claims about conflict and instead relying on statements made directly by the individuals involved. That restraint matters. Because in a story like this, speculation can easily outpace facts, and distinguishing between the two is critical. Online, the reaction has been anything but unified. Some fans have rallied behind Zach and Tori, expressing support for their decision to prioritize family and privacy. Others have voiced disappointment, feeling that the show will not be the same without them. And then there are those who have focused on the unresolved tensions, particularly the farm dispute, debating who was right, who was wrong, and whether things could have been handled differently. These conversations reflect something deeper than just fandom. They reflect how invested viewers have become in this family story. Because after nearly 2 decades on television, the Roloffs are not just characters. They are, for many, familiar faces whose lives feel intertwined with their own viewing experience. At the center of all of this is a question that goes beyond television. What happens to the family now? Because while stepping away from the show may reduce public pressure, it doesn't automatically resolve underlying issues. Family relationships are complex. They evolve. They heal. Sometimes they remain strained. And while there have been moments suggesting distance, there have also been indications, through social media and public appearances, that communication has not completely broken down, which leaves open the possibility that, over time, relationships may shift again. There wasn't one explosion. No single argument that ended it all. No dramatic scene where everything fell apart in front of the cameras. Instead, it happened slowly, quietly, through moments that, at the time, didn't seem like the end of anything, but now, in hindsight, look like the beginning of the end. Because when you trace the journey of Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff on Little People, Big World, there are specific turning points, real, documented, and visible to anyone paying close attention, that reveal how the story unfolded. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. In earlier seasons, there was a sense, almost an assumption, that the future of Roloff Farms would remain within the family. Not just symbolically, but practically. Viewers watched as the children grew up on that land, participated in its operations, and spoke openly about what it meant to them. And among them, Zach Roloff often appeared the most rooted in that vision. But over time, something subtle began to change. Conversations about the future of the farm became less certain, less collaborative, less unified. Instead of shared planning, there were individual perspectives, different expectations. And according to interviews given later, that shift became especially clear during discussions about ownership. Because while the idea of keeping the farm in the family remained appealing, the reality of making that happen proved far more complicated. Reports and statements suggest that there was a period when serious discussions took place regarding Zach potentially purchasing part of the farm from Matt Roloff. This wasn't casual talk. It was a real possibility. A transition from one generation to the next. But as both sides later indicated in separate interviews,